Pontiac 421 Super Duty. This engine didn't just win on the tracks of the 60s, it dominated, leaving competitors in a cloud of smoke. But what if its creator, General Motors, didn't just ban it, but buried it at the peak of its glory? How did a motor, whose true 500 horsepower strength was hidden behind modest paper figures, fall victim not to competition, but to internal politics and external pressure? This is a story of audacity, backdoor dealings, and a decision that could have rewritten muscle car history forever. But why was the flight of a machine ready to change the game cut short? The late 50s. Detroit's General Motors empire was flourishing, but at its heart, one of its once shining jewels was visibly tarnishing. Pontiac, a resonant name, but behind it hid a brand slowly sinking into oblivion, known merely as an old man's car. It was a synonym for boredom, predictability, practically a hearse for ambition. The sales department was barely staying afloat, innovation was stalling, and the competitive spirit so inherent to the American auto industry seemed to have abandoned these walls for good. But the calm before the storm is always fleeting. At this moment, with Pontiac on the precipice, two men destined to change the game stepped onto the stage. Seaman Bunky Knudsen, vice president of Pontiac, possessed strategic vision and a courage that bordered on recklessness. And beside him, John DeLorean, a brilliant engineer, young, audacious, with fire in his eyes and a thirst for speed in his blood. They saw the company's outdated image not as a death sentence, but as a blank canvas for a revolution. Their diagnosis was simple. Pontiac needed a pulse, adrenaline, youth. They wagered everything on a completely new concept: wide track. This was more than just a marketing slogan. It was an engineering manifesto. A widened track not only made the cars look visually more aggressive, pinning them to the asphalt, but also gave them incredible stability and handling. It was the first but decisive step from the couch to the racetrack. In a matter of months, Pontiac shed its modest mask, revealing a predatory grin. From a nondescript old-timer, it was transforming into a muscular athlete, focused on a single goal: domination. But looks alone were not enough to truly capture the hearts and minds of young America. For their roar to shatter the silence of showrooms and racetracks, something more was required. A heart capable of beating out the rhythm of victory was needed. And so, in the depths of engineering labs, where the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and metal shavings, a sacrament began. Pontiac's engineers, under DeLorean's watchful eye, set about creating an engine that was meant to be not just a power plant, but a statement. Powerful, uncompromising, capable of turning the racing world on its head. In 1961, the world saw the first hint of this madness: a new 421 cubic inch engine. This was merely a prelude, the foundation for what would be called Super Duty. Like a predator lying in ambush, Pontiac was sharpening its claws for a real hunt in the racing world. This program was pure insanity, aimed exclusively at victory. The creation of high-performance power plants capable of shredding the asphalt of NHRA drag strips and devouring the miles of NASCAR ovals. For these purposes, the engineers didn't mess around. In 1962, the 421 Super Duty was officially unveiled with a declared output of 370 to 405 horsepower. But let's be honest, these numbers were nothing more than a polite flirtation with reality, a cunning ploy to comply with racing rules and insurance requirements. It was whispered that the true power of these factory monsters easily surpassed 500, even 550 horsepower. Some, particularly bold, spoke of 600. These weren't just engines. They were beasts, honed for one purpose: to win. And win they did. To make these engines truly unstoppable, Pontiac released special lightweight versions of its Catalina and Grand Prix models. Picture this: aluminum fenders, hoods, and the thinnest possible glass. No radios, no heaters. Every gram of weight was an enemy, every extra accessory a sin. This was a purebred racing machine, built within factory walls, but with the soul of a rebel. 1962 was a year of triumph. Cars with the 421 Super Duty dominated on every front. In the smoke of drag racing, they left competitors far behind, and on the high-speed NASCAR ovals, their stability and ferocious assault forced rivals to eat their dust. Their speed was unprecedented, their reliability astounding. This wasn't just participation in races, it was a demonstration of force, a new era of dominance in which Pontiac sat on the throne. Of course, there were rumors. It was said that some teams, secretly backed by the factory, used illegal modifications, hidden fuel injection systems, cleverly tuned carburetors that delivered even more power and were virtually undetectable to inspectors. This only added to the aura of forbidden fruit and mystique surrounding the already legendary engine. But this deafening success, this flagrant superiority, attracted not only the admiring gazes of the public and beaten rivals, it also caught the attention of those who sat much higher, in stern suits, in the somber offices of Detroit. Pontiac's dizzying ascent began to raise concerns not only among competitors, but also within its own leadership. Too fast, too powerful, too dominant. No one wanted one subsidiary to outshine all the others. The air around Detroit was thickening. With every new victory for the 421 Super Duty, a shadow loomed, heralding a storm. The storm was coming, and very soon it would break, to change the fate of this engine forever, transforming it from the king of the track into a legend born under the sign of prohibition. After Pontiac gained a new, predatory stance thanks to the wide track concept, it became obvious. To dominate on the track, they needed an engine capable not just of competing, but of crushing. This wasn't just a power plant. It was the heart of a rebel, built to roar, devour asphalt, and leave only clouds of smoke and defeat in its wake. The foundation for this madness had already been laid, the 421 cubic inch engine introduced in 1961. But that was just the canvas. The real art, born in the fire of Detroit's labs, was just beginning. Pontiac's engineers weren't just building an engine, they were forging a weapon. The Super Duty program was a secret code, a password to a world of absolute speed, aimed exclusively at the brutal clashes of NHRA drag racing and the grueling marathons of NASCAR. No compromises, no concessions to comfort or economy. Only pure, untamable power. Under the leadership of John DeLorean, who lived and breathed speed, the team began transforming the 421 block. Every component had to pass through the crucible of extreme stress. Standard parts wouldn't do. The crankshafts were reinforced, capable of withstanding colossal torque. The connecting rods were not just connectors, but forged blades, designed for tens of thousands of revolutions per minute. The pistons, gliding inside cylinders polished to a mirror shine, were lightweight yet incredibly strong, ready to absorb the full force of the explosive wave. But the real magic lay in the engine's head. Pontiac's engineers re-engineered the geometry of the air passages, creating intake and exhaust systems unheard of before. Oversized valves were installed in specially designed cylinder heads, ensuring maximum inflow of the air-fuel mixture and unimpeded outflow of exhaust gases. This was a fine science, the art of airflow management, where every micron mattered. Aggressive high-lift camshafts opened the valves wider and longer, making the engine breathe like a predator at the peak of its attack. The heart of this system, however, remained traditional for the era: carburetors. But what carburetors? Not one, but often two massive 4-barrel units, capable of literally flooding the engine with fuel. These were not just metering devices. They were gates to hell, controlling the fiery power. The lubrication system was upgraded for high-load conditions, and the cooling, a key factor for any racing engine, was reinforced to ensure the wild temper of the 421 Super Duty didn't turn into boiling rage. The manufacturer officially claimed 370 or 405 horsepower for this engineering marvel. But this was a game, a perfectly played hand of poker with racing authorities and insurance companies. In the garages, where the smell of gasoline and victory reigned, whispers spoke of far more impressive figures. It was said that a true factory Super Duty easily crossed the 500 or even 550 horsepower threshold, and the most daring claimed 600 horsepower monsters whose internals hid secrets beyond an inspector's gaze. These engines were deliberately underrated on paper so they could compete at all. Built for victory, this power plant demanded a worthy vessel. Lightweight Catalinas and Grand Prix became its carriers, true racing machines stripped of anything that could add weight. Like a gladiator clad in minimal armor, a car with a 421 Super Duty was ready for the fight. And fight they did. 1962 was their year of triumph, an era when this forbidden engine proved its ruthless efficiency, sweeping aside competitors on every drag strip and every oval track. The limited number of units produced, by various estimates, fewer than 250 such engines and cars, only added to their aura of exclusivity and mystical power. Each such unit was not just an engine, but a piece of a legend, a ticket to an elite club. It was the cornerstone of a future empire of speed, the foundation for a decade of dominance that Pontiac could have built. The 421 Super Duty didn't just win races, it declared a new era. If not for one, but if not for the shadow gathering over Detroit, which would soon turn the roar of this engine into an echo of unfulfilled dreams, a legend of potential that was never allowed to be fully unleashed. The official numbers Pontiac published for its 421 Super Duty in 1962, a modest 370 or 405 horsepower, were just a smokescreen, part of a carefully orchestrated game, a disguise to avoid too many questions from insurance companies and to not upset the fragile balance of racing regulations. But in reality, these figures were an insult to the true potential hidden under the hood. In the garages, where the suffocating smell of race fuel and burnt rubber hung heavy, where everyone whispered about the next record, far more shocking stories circulated. Racers and engineers who saw these beasts in action swore by it. The real power of a factory Super Duty, even in its civilian configuration, easily soared past 550 horsepower. And in its combat-ready racing trim, where every component was pushed to its limit, this engine could produce a terrifying 600 horsepower, figures that were simply fantastical for the early 1960s. An unseen power that defied logic. How did Pontiac achieve such a crushing advantage while remaining, albeit fictitiously, within the rules? The secret was not only in the engineering perfection of the engine, which we already know, but also in how it was integrated. The cars destined for racing were not just equipped with a powerful unit. They were born for speed in every nut and bolt. Imagine, on the factory assembly lines of Detroit, where ordinary sedans were built, suddenly appearing true racing machines, stripped of everything superfluous. These weren't just modified cars, but surgically prepared projectiles designed for a single purpose: to win. Steel body panels vanished, replaced by weightless aluminum. Front fenders, hoods, anything that could be lightened. The glass became thinner, barely protecting from the wind, but saving precious grams. Inside the cabin, no frills. Forget the radio, the heater, or any option that added weight. Just gauges, a driver's seat, and a steering wheel. Spartan functionality, dictated by the brutal logic of the racetrack. Every ounce mattered. Every detail was subordinated to the pursuit of absolute minimum weight, so that every one of those unseen 500, 600 horses worked with maximum efficiency. It was this union of the incredible, yet officially hidden power of the 421 Super Duty and the lightened chassis of the Catalina and Grand Prix, pushed to their limits, that brought Pontiac an era of unprecedented dominance. 1962 was their year of triumph. On the NHRA drag strips, these cars launched as if from a slingshot, leaving competitors far behind in clouds of smoke. On the NASCAR ovals, they relentlessly widened their lead, demonstrating not only phenomenal speed, but also astonishing reliability under the most grueling conditions. This wasn't just superiority, it was humiliation. Rivals, whether from Ford, Chevrolet, or Chrysler, were in a panic. They saw Pontiac sweeping everything in its path, but couldn't understand how it was possible. The official specs didn't explain such dominance. This bred not only envy, but also suspicion. It was then, in the roar of engines and the whispers of mechanics, that rumors began to circulate that the true power of the Super Duty was hidden deeper than any inspector could see. Whispers of the forbidden. That's what you could call the stories passed from person to person. They told of illegal modifications, of secret injections of power hidden from prying eyes, special fuel injection systems concealed within carburetors, or clever modifications that were impossible to detect without a complete engine teardown. These secrets, if the rumors were to be believed, turned the already powerful 421 Super Duty into a true monster, giving it an unfair, forbidden advantage that made it virtually unbeatable. In 1962, Pontiacs with Super Duty engines didn't just win races, they dictated the terms. They forced competitors to frantically revise their strategies, their engines, their rules. It was a golden age when unseen power and the aura of the forbidden intertwined, creating a legend that would live on long after the roar of these engines faded. But the shadow over Detroit was already gathering, preparing to cut this meteoric era short at the very peak of its glory. The year 1962 was a victory parade for Pontiac. Their 421 Super Duty, that masterpiece of engineering hiding incredible power behind modest figures, tore competitors to shreds, shattering records on both drag strips and oval tracks. But clouds were already gathering over Detroit, over the entire American automotive industry. The triumphant roar of the Super Duty engines did not go unnoticed, and not just by envious rivals. In January 1963, the hammer fell. General Motors, the titan that owned Pontiac, suddenly announced a complete, uncompromising ban. From now on, no racing programs, no official support for teams, no more factory race cars disguised as production models. The curtain came down, and the legend of the 421 Super Duty seemed doomed. This corporate decree, which became known as the AMA ban, despite having only an indirect connection to the Automobile Manufacturers Association, became the lightning rod that was struck. Why? Why, at the peak of its glory, when the brainchild of Semyon Knudsen and John DeLorean, the new, youthful, performance-oriented Pontiac, was dominating the tracks, did the corporation decide to saw off the branch it was sitting on? The reasons were as multi-layered as the engine it destroyed. First, external pressure. In those years, society was beginning to awaken to issues of road safety. Ralph Nader, the future consumer advocate, was rising to prominence, his ideas hanging in the air like harbingers of a storm. The government, concerned by the rising number of accidents and aggressive marketing that associated powerful cars with speed and risk, began to scrutinize automakers closely. Racing, with its dramatic crashes and colossal speeds, was a bright but undesirable stain on their reputation. GM, as the biggest player, had to set an example. For the public good, for road safety. These were the official statements, but behind them lay deeper fears of impending regulations and lawsuits. Second, the giant's own internal contradictions. General Motors was a colossal machine, and any racing program, especially one as successful and expensive as Pontiac's, required immense resources. The scent of cost-cutting was in the air. But there was another, more subtle reason. Pontiac had become too good. GM's internal hierarchy allowed for healthy competition between its brands, but no one was supposed to dominate completely. Pontiac, with its wide track and aggressive engines, had surged ahead, leaving even Chevrolet behind, not to mention Buick and Oldsmobile. This disrupted the delicate balance of power within the corporation, creating tension and even stealing potential customers from its sister brands. The ban was a sort of corporate slap in the face, an attempt to put the upstart back in its place. And here lies the full irony of fate. The ban caught the Super Duty at a moment when the engine seemed ready for a new era of victories. NASCAR had just set a new limit for the 1963 season, a maximum engine displacement of 427 cubic inches. And our 421 cubic inch monster? It fit perfectly within those limits. It was legal. It was ready, but it was banned. Not by the rules of racing, but by a decision from its own parent company. The GM ban was a death sentence. Factory support vanished as if it had never existed. The subtle hints from engineers, the unofficial supply of special parts that made these cars unbeatable, disappeared. The golden era of Pontiac's dominance on the racetracks ended overnight. Of course, legends are legends for a reason. They don't die instantly. It was whispered that some Pontiac engineers, loyal to their creation, continued to provide consulting services to select private teams, and a black market for parts and modifications allowed the Super Duty to fight on for a while. But this was its death throes, not a triumph. The invisible hand of GM had strangled the most promising racing engine of the era. Imagine what could have been. If not for this bolt of lightning from fate, the Pontiac 421 Super Duty could have rewritten the history of American auto racing and perhaps set a completely new direction for the muscle cars of the 1960s, years ahead of its competitors. But instead, it became the brightest and most tragic chapter in the history of forbidden power, a power that was too great even for those who created it. It was not destined to be just a fast engine. It was destined to be a symbol of incredible potential, cut down in its prime. January 1963. The corporate verdict was delivered, stunning the triumphant roar of engines into silence. But if General Motors thought that with a single stroke of a pen it could extinguish the flame raging in the hearts of engineers and racers, it was sorely mistaken. The ban descended upon the tracks, but it could not stifle the thrill, could not stop those who lived for speed, who breathed horsepower. Immediately after the official announcement, the air in Detroit filled not only with disappointment, but with whispers. Whispers of defiance, whispers of the forbidden. Factory support vanished. The subtle guidance from engineering departments disappeared, and the special parts that had been part of the official program just yesterday evaporated. However, for many, this sudden end was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter written in the shadows. Imagine, the engineers whose hands created this monster, the 421 Super Duty, couldn't just walk away and forget it. It was their child, their blood and sweat, their years of sleepless nights. Some of them, the very geniuses who had underrated the official 370-405 horsepower to laughable figures when the beast's true potential in racing configurations easily surpassed 500, and according to rumors, even 600 horses couldn't turn their backs on their creation. They had seen how the lightweight Catalinas and Grand Prix, stripped of even a radio and heater, with aluminum fenders and thin glass, were ready to tear the track to shreds. And they knew that potential was still alive. It was then that an underground network began to form. Small, dedicated private racing teams that had already tasted victory with this engine refused to surrender. They knew they held not just an engine, but a true engineering masterpiece that deserved more. Secret meetings began, unofficial consultations, deals struck in the dim light of garages, far from the prying eyes of corporate oversight. Pontiac engineers, formally removed from racing, found ways for their knowledge and experience to continue serving the cause. Through the back door, sometimes for cash, sometimes out of pure passion and loyalty to the ideals of speed, illegal parts trickled down to select teams, modified carburetors that could unleash dozens of extra horsepower, components that had undergone special treatment to withstand extreme loads, and sometimes entire blueprinted engines that never appeared in official catalogs. The most audacious rumors whispered of truly forbidden modifications, hidden fuel injection systems or carburetors so finely tuned they were practically impossible to detect during inspection. These underground technologies turned the already powerful 421 Super Duty into a true ghost of the track, an invisible force that came from the shadows and snatched victory. For a time, even without official support, the legendary engine continued to live its secret life. It fought. It won. In drag racing, where every tenth of a second decided the outcome, and on the oval tracks, where not only power but endurance was required, cars with the Super Duty under the hood remained a formidable force. It was a battle of David versus Goliath, of individual skill and audacity against a corporate machine. Every such victory was an act of defiance, a loud declaration that true passion cannot be banned. The forbidden Pontiac 421 Super Duty became more than just a power plant. It became a symbol of those who dared to challenge the system, who chose the shadows and the risk, but did not abandon their faith in pure speed and power. It embodied the defiance of the racing spirit, its inability to bow to bureaucratic decrees. In every victory, won against all odds, there was a quiet but fierce protest. Over time, of course, this underground support began to dry up. The number of 421 SDs produced was extremely limited, fewer than 250 units over 2 years. Every breakdown became fatal, every lost component irreplaceable. The black market could not replace an entire factory infrastructure. The era when this engine could dominate was short-lived, but the market left was indelible. It was not just a fast engine. It was the heart of a rebellion, pulsating under the hoods of those who refused to submit. And it is this story of survival against all odds that made it not just a part of history, but a legend, shrouded in mystique to this day. And so, when the triumphant roar of the engines faded, and the racing drama seemed to have reached its finale, the real story was just beginning. For the 421 Super Duty, leaving the main stage was not an end, but the beginning of a completely different, mystical existence. From that point on, this engine ceased to be just a unit under a hood. It transformed into something much greater, a relic, a whisper, a legend. Recall that corporate ban by General Motors. It didn't just stop Pontiac's racing program. It sealed the fate of every one of these engines, making them phenomenally rare right off the assembly line. Fewer than 250 units. Think about that number. This isn't just a production run. It's a sentence of uniqueness. A tiny handful of these forbidden fruits saw the light of day before the curtains fell for good. If not for that abrupt cutoff, who knows how many there would have been. But it was precisely this truncation that made them incomparable. This extreme production limit, unwittingly imposed by corporate policy, instantly elevated the 421 Super Duty into the pantheon of the most coveted artifacts in American muscle car history. It's not just an engine. It's a witness to a grand confrontation, frozen in time. It became a silent reminder that true power, true engineering genius, can be banned, but never forgotten. Imagine, after these engines retreated into the shadows, every surviving example began to be shrouded in myths, like a coral reef forming over time, myths about its true, otherworldly power, which easily tore past the 500 horsepower mark when the factory officially claimed laughable figures, about its invincibility until it was stopped not by a competitor on the track, but by a directive from above. These stories, passed from person to person, from garage to garage, turned a piece of iron into a true treasure, enveloped in an almost mystical aura. And it wasn't just about rarity. It was about its potential, which was never fully realized at an official level. This engine was poised to forever change the landscape of American auto racing and the muscle cars of the 1960s. It could have significantly outpaced competitors in the development of high-performance engines, raising the bar to unimaginable heights. But that didn't happen, and every surviving 421 Super Duty is a fragment of that world that could have been, but never was. Today, finding one of these legends is like finding the Holy Grail for a collector. Its value is measured not only in dollars, but in the weight of the history it contains. It's not just a purchase, it's the acquisition of a piece of rebellion, the legacy of forbidden speed, a symbol of defiance pulsating under the hood. Every piston, every valve, every part of this engineering masterpiece whispers stories of unseen victories, of daring racers, and of brilliant engineers who refused to give up. It became more than just an engine. It became a reminder of the price of passion and the strength of the human spirit that refuses to submit. The 421 Super Duty is not just a treasure from the past. It is a pulsating symbol of an era when speed was rebellion and prohibition only added to the sweetness of victory. We already know its story was cut short in its prime. But what if that fateful General Motors ban had never been issued? What if the Pontiac 421 Super Duty had been given the chance to unleash its full potential, without regard for corporate directives and the envious glares of competitors? What would the golden age of muscle cars have looked like then? To grasp the scale of this unfulfilled dream, let's go back to the late 50s. Pontiac, under the bold leadership of Seaman Bunky Knudsen and the brilliant John DeLorean, was on the verge of a revolution. They were rapidly shedding their old man's car image, paving a wide track straight into the hearts of a youth hungry for speed and style. And the 421 cubic inch engine, introduced in 1961, was not just another motor. It was the foundation upon which an entire dynasty of racing kings was to be built. The Super Duty program, honed exclusively for the brutal drag racing of the NHRA and the fierce battles of NASCAR. In 1962, the 421 Super Duty was officially offered in configurations ranging from 370 to 405 horsepower. Officially. In reality, this figure was just a ruse, a clever trick designed to circumvent racing regulations and appease insurance companies. Whispers from the garages, followed by confident assertions from racers and engineers of the time, spoke of entirely different numbers. The real power of these monsters, especially in race trim, easily surpassed 500. even 550 horsepower. Some dared to speak of 600. And these were not empty words. In that same year of 1962, the lightweight Catalinas and Grand Prix, equipped with this engineering marvel, with aluminum fenders, hoods, and thin glass, stripped of even a radio and heater, dominated the tracks. They tore competitors to shreds, whether on the drag strip or the NASCAR ovals, demonstrating unprecedented speed and reliability. It was total supremacy that made rivals' palms sweat. But even this official triumph was just the tip of the iceberg. Persistent rumors circulated that some teams, secretly backed by Pontiac, did not shy away from illegal modifications. Hidden fuel injection systems, modified carburetors. These secret tweaks unleashed even more wild, untamed power. They were almost invisible to inspectors, but their presence was felt by every competitor left, eating the dust of the departing Pontiacs. It was this dominance, this audacious aggression on the track, that may have been one of the reasons the curtains fell. In January 1963, General Motors announced a complete ban on participation in any racing programs. This was not only a response to growing pressure from the government and safety advocates. It was a strategic strike. Within GM, dissatisfaction was growing. Pontiac was too good, too dominant. It was diverting attention and resources from the corporation's other divisions. The ban was an act of balancing power and a way to cut costs. But for Pontiac, it was a death sentence. Even the fact that the 421 Super Duty formally fit within NASCAR's new engine displacement limits, up to 427 cubic inches, no longer mattered. The corporate guillotine severed its official support, and the dream collapsed. But imagine for a second, what if that had never happened? What if Pontiac had continued to develop this engineering masterpiece? We might have witnessed a completely different history. The Super Duty era could have lasted for years, forcing Ford and Chrysler to scramble for answers to an unprecedented challenge. Each generation of the 421 SD would have become faster, more powerful, more perfect. Perhaps Pontiac would not only have dominated, but also dictated the pace of development for the entire high-performance engine industry. Technologies that appeared years later could have been tested on Pontiac's tracks in the mid-60s. The company's engineers, spurred on by success, would have pushed horsepower to incredible levels, perhaps making 600 horsepower the standard and 700 the next target. Hot versions of civilian cars would not only have become more powerful, but would have offered unprecedented tuning potential, creating a whole new class of muscle cars where every Pontiac was a potential track beast straight from the showroom. Even after the official ban, the fire didn't go out completely. It's said that Pontiac's engineers, unable to accept their loss, continued to provide consulting services and supply parts to select privateer teams through the back door. This allowed the 421 Super Duty to remain competitive for a while longer, proving that true passion knows no prohibitions. Thus, the Pontiac 421 Super Duty, this engineering masterpiece, remains the eternal what if. It was poised to forever change the landscape of American auto racing and muscle cars. It could have laid the foundation for an era where power and speed were the absolute rulers, not just one aspect among many. Its untapped potential is not just a missed opportunity. It is a beacon shining from the past, a reminder of the bold ambitions that were throttled by a corporate hand but were never forgotten. It became a symbol of unfulfilled triumphs, a ghost of speed that still haunts the tracks, and a harbinger of a muscle car era that could have been entirely different had the Pontiac 421 Super Duty been given its chance. It left its mark not by dominating as it could have, but by becoming a legend whose power was so great that not even a corporation could bury it completely. The story of the Pontiac 421 Super Duty is not just a saga of a mighty engine and glorious victories. It is a profound reflection on the eternal conflict between untamable human ambition, which strives for absolute superiority, and the invisible strings of power capable of cutting short a flight at its peak. We have seen how passion and engineering genius can transform an entire brand, but also how corporate will conceal the fate of a great creation, turning potential triumph into an eternal legend. To what extent is the world we know shaped not by what happened, but by what was forbidden? And can true passion ever be fully extinguished, or does it merely retreat into the shadows, only to one day flare up brightly again in memory? What do you think, dear viewers? Share your thoughts in the comments, give us a like if this story captivated you, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue our journey along the winding roads of history, where speed meets destiny.